Welcome to the Critic and the Pleb. I'm Ben, I'm the critic.
And I'm Caitlin, I'm the plebe. This is a podcast where we take turns choosing movies to offer our different perspectives and to hopefully entertain and or inform you all.
A brief warning. This podcast may contain adult content and will definitely contain spoilers. If you haven't seen the film in the episode title and don't want anything given away, please go see the film first and come back later to listen.
Life's not fair, is it, my little friend? While some are born to feast, others spend their lives in the dark. Begging for scraps.
Everything you see exists together in a delicate balance. While others search for what they can take, a true king searches for what he can give.
Run away, Simba, and never return.
You must take your place in the circle of life.
Welcome to the Critic and the Plebe. Today we unlikely warthog companions are discussing my latest plebe pick, director Jon Favreau's 2019 live-action remake of The Lion King, starring Donald Glover, Beyoncé, James Earl Jones, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Billy Eichner, and Seth Rogen.
In case you didn't have a childhood or don't have any contact whatsoever with advertising, the Letterboxd plot overview says, Simba idolizes his father, King Mufasa, and takes to heart his own royal destiny. But not everyone in the kingdom celebrates the new cub's arrival. Scar, Mufasa's brother and former heir to the throne, has plans of his own. The battle for Pride Rock is ravaged with betrayal, tragedy, and drama, ultimately resulting in Simba's exile. With help from a curious pair of newfound friends, Simba will have to figure out how to grow up and take back what is rightfully his. Why'd you pick this one?
I think the main reason I picked this one is because it's Disney, and I just have an obligation to see every Disney movie as a Disney fan. But just seeing the trailer for this one, it looked like it would be pretty epic, and I was excited to see it. I watched The Lion King, obviously, when I was a kid, so it has that nostalgia factor. It's something that I just kind of had to see. I didn't really question whether or not we would go to see it because it's a great movie, and I was curious to see what they would do with a live action remake. So one of the first things we kind of wanted to talk about is that I found the movie to be pretty moving. It definitely pulled on my heartstrings. I choked up, I think, 3 or 4 times, like I was on the verge of tears and I had that lump in my throat. And then I actually did cry once when Simba sees Mufasa in the clouds, and Rafiki is telling him about his legacy, and that's kind of like how you were connected to the ones that you've lost. Oh, that got me. That was very powerful. So it definitely, I think the movie, it did what it was supposed to in it was able to get strong emotional reactions.
And that's where I need to question it, because throughout this whole movie, the question that kept running through my head was, does this young punk really deserve all this credit for copying off the older kid's homework? You know, it's like having a sibling that's 15 years older than you and, oh, I saved my notebooks from Miss Whatever's class. You can totally just see them and study off of those. But the kid just uses it frame for frame, carbon copy. And anything that evoked any emotion was purely because it was just a painting, like a new painting. It is just a photorealistic cover version of the 94 original for me. So I mostly just kind of felt like, so what, and more insulted by it. It's like other live action remakes, and we'll talk about a little bit about all of them later on and throughout, I'm sure, but the other Disney live action remakes certainly have relied on nostalgia. I mean, yeah, I get it. That's what the main driving force is. But this is the first time, for me at least, that it's felt like, are you serious? Is this really what we're doing? This is just the same damn thing. I was even flipping through the animated one last night after we got back, and just that just made me even more frustrated with it. Because yeah, sure, it'll stir you, it'll entertain you, but you know, with a juggernaut with this much power behind it and this much money to funnel into something actually creative and new, it felt like a ripoff. This one just felt pretty cynical to the audience, really. Just, oh, they'll buy anything twice. Here we go. So my emotions were complicated by that constantly throughout the movie.
And I definitely agree with that. Like, when I was having emotional moments, it was during times that were all in the original movie.
Like, beat for beat.
Yeah, like I got choked up at Mufasa's death, which happens exactly the same way as it does in the original animated film. I got choked up at, again, the moment with Rafiki when he's showing Mufasa in the clouds. Like, all parts, really meaningful parts that were from the original animated movie were the parts that made me get emotional in this. So I think that speaks to the genius of the original, but doesn't necessarily speak to this at all, because it really is just a spruced up version of the original animated one. Part of me wonders if the computer generated animation felt a little more realistic to me, so I was a little more connected to it, but it's also, I haven't seen the original since I was a kid, so I think a lot of it is just, I'm remembering the powerful story more than anything.
And I guess let's just segue right into the animation style. We'll flip a talking point here and put number 3 at second. But you said that it was a spruced up version of the animated one. Throughout the whole thing, I was left wondering, is it really any better? I mean, yeah, sure, we've got these special effects here now. But I didn't, again, I feel like my emotions weren't there. One, because of the repetition and just the fact that it's the same damn thing. But the eyes, they don't have the eyes right at all yet. I mean, that's the hardest thing, because I was getting uncanny valley vibes from the eyes of each animal. All the eyes looked the same, they looked lifeless. It reminded me of the shark from Jaws at some points. Maybe not quite that bad, but you know what I mean. The eyes were all the same. There was no emotion there, and there really weren't any moments that stood out to me as, wow, this is beautiful in its own right. This is beautiful in a new way. Like, oh, what a gorgeous shot! I would frame that on my wall. Not a single moment like that throughout. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know if there's much virtue in having this kind of thing with this, just remaking this animated classic that has such vibrant colors, that has such memorable images, that clearly has such memorable images, because if the images weren't memorable and weren't well colored, then I wouldn't have that question running through my head with this one. Just, isn't this the same thing exactly every other 10 seconds?
And I guess I disagree slightly. I don't think the eyes are perfect, but there were actually several moments that I got a lot of power from the eyes. The main one that comes to mind is when young little baby Simba is like talking to Scar, who's sitting on a rock, and Simba's like, guess I'll have to give you orders one day. And then there's like this slow zoom on Scar, and you can see like the loathing in him. Like, I got a lot of emotion from his eyes in that moment. I mean, you can't really do facial expressions on a realistic lion, but I could see like hate there. So I guess maybe that's a differing
To me,
opinion?
he just looked the same like as he always did. I was looking for like I started paying attention to it because it's like I'm not really connecting as much as I do with with the animated characters. And I've got this weird thing where where I feel emotion more with animated characters than lots of live action ones. But still, I was really looking for it and thinking and like paying close attention to everybody's eyes, and it just wasn't there. Which I'm not saying that the fur textures, feathers, there is some fantastic stuff from the technical side of things. I still don't think it was certainly not original cinematography, and again not super beautiful to me in any way that super stood out. But yeah, I can still appreciate the technical innovations from the texture standpoints and how the light hits the fur and the feathers and everything like that. But those eyes, not quite right. Not scary. I'm not having nightmares about them, but they're not conveying.
And then I disagree. I got a lot from the eyes. I think with animated characters, they are so over exaggerated because that's just the nature of animation, is that you have to kind of over exaggerate the facial expressions and the features. In this, they're a little bit more subtle, but I think that worked. I do not think this was original by any means, but I do think it was beautiful. I mean, just watching like the stream rippling through that water, just so realistic. The little mouse at the very beginning looked exactly like a real mouse, and just looking at like the rocks
The
placed
movement
around.
of that mouse, to interrupt briefly, but the movement of the mouse was wonderful.
Yeah, well, all of the movements were really good, and the just the environments that they created, I thought it was stunning as a visual experience.
Not really. Is there like any shot that really is like sticking in your craw though? That when you come out of this, can you like
A
really
few.
cycle back to like an image? I don't feel like anything will last. Like obviously, sure, I can find some because we saw it a day and a half ago now only, but I don't know. I don't know. Nothing stunned me.
I mean, the
Really
tree
stunned me.
that Rafiki is in when it's all like it's nighttime and kind of like lit up by fireflies, I remember that. I remember really being impressed by the stream bubbling through and the scene where Timon and Pumbaa bring Simba to their
That's
kind
his
of
name.
oasis. Like when they look over the cliff at that beautiful area, like I remember that. Simba crawling through the jungle with Rafiki jumping around. Like I think visually, they did a great job.
I wonder how much was. Now I'm just curious how much was real, or if it was all CGI or not, because it's really hard to tell nowadays. I'd be curious.
Yeah, because it looked
No.
so realistic, which is an accomplishment in and of itself, I think.
And I suppose I just did miss the charm that the animation had, though, because I think with this, when it comes down to it, is this that much different? It's just like a super high budget Air Bud movie in a way. When it really comes down to it, like, does that really work? It doesn't for me. Like, as compared to like animation, which can really capture the charm of the characters, the humanity of the characters a lot more. Uh, there was the only part that I really genuinely enjoyed and that felt kind of new, even though it still was ripping off the first one, was the When the Lion Sleeps Tonight one. And I write about this in my Letterboxd review for it. I open with the only memorable part of this is the moment that feels the most like animation because it's Timon and Pumbaa singing it, and then there's some other animals that are hopping alongside them, and the parrots are squawking along with it, and that's the only part that I remember because it actually feels animated.
I think you're just lusting after the animation style, so you're
Well, there's
getting
also
colored
stuff-
by the original.
There's also stuff that just isn't effective as is though for me. Like we talked about the eyes, we talked about a few other aspects.
Agree to disagree, because it worked for me.
Not agree to disagree. That's not this thing. We're just disagreeing.
Well, yeah,
this
but
isn't an
we're
agree to
agreeing to
disagree.
disagree because I don't think either of us will change each other's minds. I mean, the visual thing worked for me; it didn't work for you.
Yeah, so a disagreement there.
Yes,
It wouldn't
but
be
we
an
are
agree to disagree.
agreeing to disagree. That's what that means. We both continue to have our different opinions, and we respect that. I respect your different opinions.
We made a list right after we got out of the added stuff to this. And there isn't a lot because it's totally unnecessary padding. The original didn't need anything added in. The stuff that they do add in here is flaccid. Flaccid and unnecessary. I didn't hate it. It's not harmful to anything like the Aladdin one, which had some stuff added in that was just like, that did actually detract from even just the base story. So it didn't have that, at least. But what they did add in, it just, again, made this feel unnecessary to me. Because the stuff that they do have added in, what is some of the stuff that we have on that list? It's in front of you, isn't it?
Kind of the mouse and his little walking around sequence is kind of extended. There's a time when like a piece of fur pops off of Simba's mane and floats away and eventually makes its way to Rafiki through a series of events.
Series of nature. It ends up going through a giraffe and coming out as shit, and then the dung beetle rolls it. And
a bird tries to put it in its nest and then flies out.
Yeah, it's this whole thing. And those moments really felt like, I was reading somebody who follows me on Letterboxd and that I follow him, his review of it said that at times the movie felt like a majestic tech demo. And that's what I felt during those two scenes in particular. It's just like, did somebody just make this, or like the first part of this, as like a, hey, we got this technology now, Jon Favreau, want to come on board and direct The Lion King? Because that's what those two felt like.
And I definitely see that, and I agree with that. Some other added things, the hyena clan had a little bit more of a backstory. Pumbaa and Timon had more of like a community. They lived with other animals. It wasn't just the two of them. There were like a bunch of animals that were kind of outcasts. The hyenas come up with an excuse for not killing Simba.
Which was so... That one just annoyed me because it just didn't need to happen at all. It was just... that was an example that we'll talk about too with the one that's about to come up, of just planting something and then like a really half-assed payoff later on.
And that moment didn't bother me at all. I had no problem with that. Rafiki, his character was slightly different here and there. It's like he was there at some times when he wasn't in the original, or he like said more at certain times or said less.
I feel like he was in the original more, is what we thought.
I kind of feel like he was in the original more.
Although he did still fight off the hyenas in the original with the staff. Mm-hmm. That felt weird in this one because by virtue, again, that was a moment where it was like something that works really well in animation, but just looked kind of stupid in this one. Because when it happened in this one, I was like, did that really happen in the animated one? This is dumb. But it works better in the original. I went back and watched the scene, and he's doing this whole kung fu thing. It's like a Hong Kong Phooey kind of tribute almost.
Well, and silly things always work better in animation.
And it elicits an effect that is good, because here it was like trying to come off as strangely... I feel like it needs to feel like badass, but it just felt like, huh?
Well, I think it was supposed to still be funny. Like, I think that was the idea of it, but I don't think it works as well for a realistic-looking baboon.
No.
They added a Beauty and the Beast reference, where right before Pumbaa and Timon are live bait, Timon, I combined Pumbaa and Timon. Timon kind of starts to sing "Be Our Guest" from Beauty and the Beast.
Because in the original, it's the hula stuff. And
yeah.
I don't know what exactly they're doing in the original, but it's hilarious.
Yeah.
But instead of the hula thing, they've got...
Yeah. So they sing "Be Our Guest," or the beginning sequence of "Be Our Guest," and that was the one addition that I did not like, because that's very...
why didn't you like that?
That to me is just very obviously like, look at our grand empire we have, that we can just quote our source material and throw it in whenever we want.
And
it's like when
gonna know.
It's like when in the Marvel movies, I think it was Spider-Man Homecoming, somebody said something about like, he doesn't get my Star Wars references or something like that.
Or Far From Home.
Yeah, or Far From Home. Yeah. But like throwing that in there just because you can be like, we own that. Look at all the references we can make.
Yeah, it is a little masturbatory. Or not masturbatory, but cocky. At least.
It just bothers me. It's like that pulls me out of the movie. It doesn't immerse me more and make me feel like, oh, look at the whole universe. They all go together. It's like, no, that's not how this should work.
And that's why Wreck-It Ralph 2 scared me a little. Even though Wreck-It Ralph 2, in its defense, it does have that, but it makes sense as it's the internet and there's there's a bunch of shit on the internet, so whatever. That at least worked in the context of the story.
I think Wreck-It Ralph 2 did it much better.
But I'm just saying that when I watched it, we went out of it, and I said, well, that's scary. I'm scared of the giant empire now of Disney, because they have literally everything. And this is just, well, we own you now. We can make these little jokes, and we'll all laugh.
Yeah.
So it did feel like that was looming over us with that.
Mm-hmm. That just annoyed me. It's like, don't put in something that's already great into your other movie that you want to be great and be like, look, we can do this. We own all these things. That would just cheapened it a little bit for me. And then
already very cheap everything, just by virtue of its existence, in my opinion. But
fair enough. And then the only other thing that was kind of added is that, like, Nala and the lead hyena, who I think is played by Lupita Nyong'o.
I don't think so at all.
I think she is.
I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure. Okay, well, the lead hyena is a woman. So she and Nala have kind of like this female boss battle kind of dynamic going on.
Beyonce.
Yeah.
So I feel like the only reason that they added in was because Beyonce needed something more.
One of the other things I just kind of wanted to bring up about this movie in particular is that it feels very Shakespearean, and I think it's supposed to, but it's honestly kind of dark for a Disney movie. Or that's why I didn't watch it as much when I was a kid, because it scared me a little bit.
This was probably the one that I watched. This was probably in the top 4 that had the most cycle at my house.
It's interesting.
Aladdin being the top, and this was up there too.
Sure. And I think I gravitated more towards the princess ones, perhaps because I was a girl, probably. But like, I just remember all of the murder being scary to me, and seeing it in a live action as opposed to animated made me cringe even a little bit more, especially at the end when Scar's being attacked by the hyenas. And you like see that briefly, like that just gave me shivers. It's just kind of interesting.
You don't see it. That's what makes it so memorable.
Well,
you
yeah,
see
but
the shadows.
You see the beginning of it. You see the hyenas jumping on him and him trying to bat them away, and he's swarmed. It gives me very like Game of Thrones vibes when the whites are going after people, like swarming and like tearing apart. Like it just creeps me out. And then we see the shadow, and it's just very like, ugh. And I think that's one interesting thing about the difference between your classic animated and this more computer-generated stuff is it looks more realistic, so I think it has a little bit more of an impact there, or at least it did for me.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I mean, I never thought that this felt particularly dark. It was just sort of well done story and drama.
Mm-hmm.
Even as a kid, it didn't feel super dark. I'm trying to think of what the darkest one for me as a kid was. I mean, Black Cauldron. We rented that once, and that Horn
That was
King
an interesting experience.
Horrifying. No, when I was a kid, I rented it.
Oh.
Yeah.
As adults, it was still pretty horrifying, though.
Yeah, we gotta talk about that one at some point. After Caitlin's favorite, Home on the Range.
No.
And you didn't even see all of that one, so you can't even weigh in technically.
Well, I had to stop because it was awful. It's the one Disney movie that just, oy vey, Home on the Range.
Yeah, call yourself a fan, you can't even complete the whole filmography. Anyway. But the darkness, but yeah, it's interesting to put something like this out in a world where everybody's seeing Planet Earth on Netflix. And maybe that experience is oddly tied into how you feel about the violence in this one.
I think so, because watching this, a lot of the time it felt like a nature documentary.
Mm-hmm.
It just the way it looked, and like watching animals move around and hunt and stalk, and like it did feel sort of like I was watching something on National Geographic.
So we've got a few. Well, I've mostly been putting out negative and middling things so far, but I will say that I was very pleased with Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen as Timon and Pumbaa. Those were big shoes to fill. They're probably, I'd say, the most iconic sidekicks of the Disney animated canon, or at least they've got a pretty damn good stake for the top spot. They could compete.
They're definitely up there.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably my favorite part of this, is that a lot of Timon and Pumbaa's lines were different than the original. They were new.
Yeah, as far as we remember, we're gonna watch the original soon just to check,
but it felt fresh, and the way they were interacting felt like a fresh duo. They like were riffing really well with each other.
They had solid chemistry.
It was very funny. So I think Timon and Pumbaa were done very well.
Yeah, I was pleased with that. I was definitely pleased with that. Definitely the highlight. And at times, at the beginning, I liked Chiwetel Ejiofor's Scar, but obviously, you can't beat Jeremy Irons. However, this Scar was much better than the previous villain in the last live-action Disney remake that came out a couple months ago, but we don't need to throw too much shade at that.
Yeah, I liked the way Scar worked. It just his voice was very chilling most of the time, and it was cool to listen to. And I really liked John Oliver as Zazu.
Yeah.
I mean, that was something that had to happen.
Well, that was just bound to work. Like, that's just the most obvious. Like, it's the most obvious, but the most apt casting. Like, not obvious in a bad way, just like...
It's just very fulfilling to see it come to fruition.
Just kind of inevitable.
Really. It was enjoyable. And obviously James Earl Jones coming back as Mufasa.
Yeah, it's just great that he's still alive. Just one of the best voices ever in history. So, I wanted to spend a little bit of the podcast, or the end here, just thinking about taking stock of the live-action Disney remakes so far. And we'll try our best to remember all of them for a tentative ranking. But the one that it got me thinking the most was The Jungle Book, because that was directed by the same director, Jon Favreau, who also kicked off the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Iron Man, and I believe that The Jungle Book was the first live-action Disney remake too. So,
if you don't count Cinderella.
That's true. Never mind. Cinderella definitely was, or Maleficent technically.
I was gonna say Maleficent too, but that's like sort of.
Well, it still is though. It still is in the canon of live-action Disney remake. They're not gonna make a Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah, but they didn't remake Sleeping Beauty. You know what I mean? Like, it was a totally different thing.
I'd say it still counts though, and honestly, they should try to lean towards Maleficent stuff a little bit more. That's
you don't like Maleficent.
I didn't like Crow Guy, and I didn't like it overall, but it was still a little bit more, at least, new and interesting, and they're trying something. Mm-hmm. So I can still... I'd rather they do that than something like The Lion King again, because The Lion King needed 0 improvements. Same with Aladdin. Aladdin needed 0 improvements, and they ended up making it worse with the Aladdin live-action remake. I don't dislike Lion King as much as Aladdin. Aladdin is the worst live-action remake that's come out.
I agree.
In my opinion.
I agree, because they took something that was already good and made it bad.
Yeah. It was great, and they made it bad. And with the Maleficent is probably the second worst for me.
If you count it, yeah.
I think everybody does, but... And the second one coming out, that just looks like a hot mess.
The trailer was not edited very well. It was a little all over the place.
I don't think the movie is going to be edited very well, and the
probably
movie will
not.
Be all over
I mean,
the place.
The first Maleficent was.
But
not
yeah, the trailer
great.
was definitely edited poorly. You're right about that. There was a lot of plot strands.
Yeah, jumping around.
But it made me, anyway, back to the Jungle Book, we got sidetracked, but it made me think about the Jungle Book mostly. Afterwards, I was comparing the Jungle Book 2016 to the Lion King. Now, the Jungle Book remains the strongest Disney live-action remake for me, because Jungle Book 67 was essentially a collection of skits when it comes down to it. It was pretty episodic. Now, I love Jungle Book 67. Still has a strong nostalgic place in my heart. I appreciate it. I'll watch it any time. But on a technical level and a story level, the 2016 Jungle Book coheres a lot more successfully than the 67 original. They took not a masterpiece of the Disney canon, still beloved, but not a masterpiece, and they were able to improve upon it. I also thought about the technology in the Jungle Book because it's very similar, obviously, to the Lion King. It's just 3 years apart, and they're trying to achieve the same goals. But I was thinking, why did that work so much better for the Jungle Book compared to the Lion King? And I could only come up with Mowgli, I suppose, because Mowgli is a human interacting with these animals, so maybe that just gives us an in. But then
Kind of balances it for you.
Yeah, perhaps that's my only possible thought, I suppose, because there's something that just feels off about this new Lion King that I did not feel off with in the Jungle Book, even though in many essential ways they're trying to achieve the same kind of deal, and very heavily populated by these photorealistic animals. I don't know. Thoughts on that?
I don't think the Jungle Book worked better for me in terms of the animation. I could see why, like, the presence of Mowgli would be kind of different and perhaps helpful because you see a real human interacting with the computer generation, so it makes it transition a little bit easier into realism for us. I did not have an issue with the Lion King animation. Like, I didn't get emotionlessness out of it. So they're kind of on the same level for me, personally.
Interesting. I guess we should just hop into grades. I'll start. C minus for The Lion King. And I've got Aladdin at a D, maybe D plus, but I think a D last I checked. So it's not as bad as Aladdin, but I think it's right around that. It might be about the same grade as Maleficent, actually, with C minus. But this just, again, it made me feel, this feels like the most cynical of the live action remakes to me. It feels like the most cash grabby. It did not justify its existence in any way, and it's just copying the first one completely, trying to add in, like, barely even trying to add in anything new to it. And that just, again, speaks to, this didn't need to happen. It really didn't need to happen. Like, you're not even trying to do anything new with it. You're just copying exact frames of this animated classic, and you're just churning it out again for more money. And it just felt totally unnecessary to me. It didn't justify its existence in any way. It was still, like, fine, and again, I'm not going to lie and say that I wasn't entertained at some points throughout. And I'm not going to lie and say I'd rather watch Aladdin again than this, because I wouldn't, and that factored into my grade for this too, and why it's at a C minus as opposed to lower. But it just, I'm looking, like, for live action remakes of Disney, I'm looking for, do you justify your existence? Should you be alive? This one just, I cannot find any convincing argument for, yes, this should be alive.
I definitely agree that I don't think Disney should be doing all of these live action remakes. They have gotten to the point where they are just doing them because they know that people will go see them out of nostalgia and they will make them money. I definitely agree with that point. I would much rather that Disney do something original and do something new with their time and their vast amounts of money. They could be making new and interesting things more frequently if they weren't doing these live action remakes.
Or, again, like they did with the Jungle Book or even Dumbo, remake something that could have something added in. Sorry to interrupt,
But at the same time, if I were to look at this movie and have just seen this movie by itself, it would have been, and if I hadn't seen the original and if I didn't know about the original, like maybe I'm a kid and I haven't seen the original, maybe I'm 5 or 6 and this is my first exposure to The Lion King, I think it would be just as impactful for me. I'm not saying that justifies its existence in any way because they can still just go watch the original and get that same thing out of it. But I think as a standalone thing, this movie was very good. It like I said, it pulled at my heartstrings. I think it was beautiful. The voice acting was really good. But I am knocking it down. I give it a B because like it does everything right, it does everything well, but the only reason it does that is because it had the genius of the first one to really rely on. So honestly, if it didn't have that and this was an original thing all on its own and like this was something new that they came up with, this would be a solid A for me.
But it isn't.
I know that. That's why it's a B.
That.
Yeah, that's why it's a B. Agree to disagree.
Not this time.
Again, when you can't change somebody else's opinion, you just have to respectfully agree to disagree, Benjamin.
No, you don't.
Yes, you do.
Not when you're comparing critiques and not with this. Again, I don't even like. Again, it's like too lazy to even like hate. It's like too just average, and again, it's just copying off the older kids' homework, and it's too cheap to even hate, but it's just still just frustrating on that just level of you're this juggernaut and this is really the best you can come up with and do. Like this can't be fulfilling for just about every creative person that's in the middle of this.
Well, and I definitely agree. Like I would much rather that they do something original and something new. And there are some cool new ones coming out, I think next year that look really neat. And that's what I wish they would spend more of their time on.
But yet you'll support this effort with a solid grade.
I mean, I'm not supporting it, but I don't think it was a bad movie. I don't think it was a bad movie. If I'm giving it a grade, I'm going to give it an unbiased grade. It was a good movie. Did it need to exist? No, but...
What do you mean by an unbiased grade? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Like, I'm just grading it as itself without trying to think about, well, the original was the same thing, you know?
So just no context at all?
Well, that's why I knocked it down to a B, because I'm taking that context into consideration.
Just sounded contradictory for a second, but I suppose we're at an impasse, as we tend to come to on this podcast. But that's the fun of it. That's the point.
Agree to disagree.
That's really not.
That's what it is. You'll get there eventually.
I don't think it applies.
You'll get there.
Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Follow us on Letterboxd. Subscribe to us on the YouTubes. And our next episode will be something with an original screenplay. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino's 9th feature film. And until then, happy viewing.